Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar on assessing cybersecurity. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal colleagues joining us for this session. My name is Robert Sterling and I'm the CEO of NADA. And we know that assessing cybersecurity is a really important issue for our members. So just over a year ago, the New South Wales Council of Social Services, NCOSS, partnered with WorkVentures to conduct an in-depth cybersecurity assessment of 14 New South Wales social services organisations. And NADA was fortunate to be amongst several peak bodies to be able to nominate a member to be part of those assessments. And we're going to be hearing from a representative from the Buttery as part of this session. So the project aimed to provide participating organisations with a detailed report on cybersecurity risks, along with recommendations to mitigate them. So it was to build an evidence base about understand and quantify cybersecurity risks in the sector, and also to develop an anonymised sector report to inform the New South Wales Government about the risks faced by service providers, the potential impact on service users, and the level of investment needed to strengthen cybersecurity protections. So WorkVentures is Australia's first not-for-profit IT social enterprise dedicated to improving technology access, digital skills and cyber safety for not-for-profits and the communities that they serve. And to date, they've supported hundreds of NFPs and over 90,000 individuals nationwide. So today, WorkVentures will help demystify cybersecurity, share key insights from this project, and provide practical strategies to help your organisation mitigate key risks. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gabe, who is the project lead from WorkVentures, to talk us through the presentation.
Thanks, Rob, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Like Rob mentioned, this has been quite a large piece of work. We've been working with NCOSS and the organisations who were part of this project for more than a year now, and really keen today to share some of the high-level insights from that project, hopefully provide you with some takeaways. So I'll go into the three key takeaway points that went into that report. A bit about the threat landscape. So what we're seeing from the cybersecurity environment as it relates to NFPs and what threats we're actually seeing materialize. And I'll provide a case study on an incident that occurred within the scope of this project and provide some details on what happened, how that actually occurred, and some easy steps to mitigate a lot of the risk that's associated with some common scenarios. And at the end, I'll give a bit of a basics checklist just for you to consider hypothetically whether you have considered these things within your own organisation, and if you haven't, perhaps look to implement those. So with me on the call from WorkVentures is Mil Kodagama, who's our head of client solutions, and Johannes Chung, who's a business development representative with us. So thanks. And I guess there's also a larger team behind this project from a WorkVentures perspective. We've had a team of about 10 people internally who have contributed to the cybersecurity component. We've had some project managers and our leadership team who have all provided inputs here, as well as the time of the NFPs who are in the scope of this project. So like I said, it has sort of been quite a large piece of work. So just to provide you with a bit more context around the project itself. So we work with 14 organisations to do an in-depth cyber risk assessment. The profile of those organisations was they sat between $2 and $20 million of total revenue and 10 to 100 full-time employees. So quite a large range of organisations there. The methodology that we examined each organisation under was we scored them out of 100, and then we considered a score of 80 to be a mature score. So we really looked into all aspects of the organisation. We looked into technology, so the systems and network environment. We also looked into the people and processes. So really did a deep dive. We spent more than 50 hours on calls with the organizations, asking questions around those risk areas and really trying to understand the processes, the data they're storing, the people they're serving as well. And all of that culminated in an advocacy report. So that report will be available within the next several weeks, and that will be sent out to attendees. And really, that'll provide a much more detailed view of what has sort of what the findings are. But today, I'll sort of go through the high level. So the first key observation is that cyber maturity is concerningly low from this the target cohort of 14 organizations. So none of the organizations met the benchmark for cyber maturity, or 80 out of 100 points. All of the organizations did recognize that this is an area of importance. So a lot referenced high profile breaches that they'd seen in the news and recognize that this is an area of increasing importance, but that they just don't have the resources and the time to actually address this in a proper way. And a lot of them didn't know where to start. There's a wealth of resources out there, but to actually address things in a effective manner was difficult. And smaller organizations demonstrated the lowest levels of maturity. So we examined there is a direct correlation between the total revenue and the cyber maturity score, which places smaller organizations at an increasing risk. So you can see that graph with the red box, which basically shows the organizations that are at critical risk of a data breach. And it's basically a case of not if something is going to happen, but when something is going to happen. One of the organizations I will show you in a case study actually incurred a data breach several weeks after we engaged them, and basically said that, look, we had the recommendations, but we just didn't have the time, the resources to actually address this. And the data breach occurred as a result of that. So I'll sort of step you through what happened and provide some guidance on how to actually avoid that specific scenario and many others like it. The second observation is that there is an excessive and misplaced reliance on external parties. So the key one is cyber insurance, which we can see from the chart at the bottom of this slide. 93% of the focus group held cyber insurance policies, compared to 20% of Australian small and medium enterprises of a similar profile, which looks like a fantastic stat at the outset. But when we actually peeled back the layers and saw that risk wasn't being addressed internally, it was just being transferred into insurance. This is fine if you're looking for perhaps you will get a small payout after the incident, but doesn't account for reputational loss and loss of stakeholder and donor trust that can, and we have seen result from cybersecurity incidents. We know that the average cost to medium enterprises is just shy of $65,000 per incident, and that is typically only for a small or isolated type of event. We've also seen large-scale organizations incur a data breach and then they've gone insolvent, so they've been bankrupted as a result of that. MediSecure, Pareto Phone are clear examples of that. So cyber insurance is one of those external parties that we're seeing too much reliance placed on. The other one is IT managed service providers. And 13 of the 14 organizations we worked with had an IT managed service provider. And really, anecdotally, a lot of them rely wholeheartedly on these IT providers to manage cybersecurity. And what we're seeing is that there is definitely a misplaced trust, because in a lot of circumstances, without an independent assessment of what they're doing, there's been a lot of vulnerabilities that we've identified through this project that have gone unnoticed. So it is really critical, if you use an external provider to manage your IT infrastructure, that you're performing an independent assessment. Throughout this talk, just to break up me speaking to everyone, we've got a few polls, and it'd be great to hear from everyone. So if we can launch the first poll, Rob, it'd be great to get the responses of those on the call. So have you conducted an independent cyber assessment in the past 12 months? Give it a few moments. If we've got a decent amount of responses, we can probably have a look at the result there. So yeah, 80% saying no. This is very representative of the broader sector. So absolutely critical. That's if you're looking at cybersecurity and you want to perform an uplift or a transformation project to further secure your organization, that is the number one starting place. Like I said, there are so many resources out there. Knowing exactly what to do is really critical so that you're not burning resources and spending cash unnecessarily. So the assessment will help to shine a light on exactly what you need to focus on. So thank you, everyone. The next part of this slide here is really around what we've observed is cloud migration. So we're seeing NFPs either entirely migrating to cloud-based services or in the process of migrating to the cloud, which means that your data is stored and managed by software vendors and third parties. So they are managing the security around that data. And it's critical that you're understanding exactly how that's being conducted, because we've seen an enormous amount of what we call supply chain attacks. So attackers know that certain vendors do not have the right practices in place, and they can exploit that to gain access to databases containing information that pertains to your organization. So really critical to be looking at performing due diligence on those software vendors. What we observe from these 14 organizations is that by and large, that is not being done. I think it was 70% of those organizations do not have any sort of process in place to actually assess their third parties. The next observation is that most organizations haven't addressed the basics, let alone more complex solutions that are necessary. So a few of the stats here were that, like I said, 70% haven't conducted any due diligence on their supply chain. 93% don't have controls in place to limit what software can be installed on their devices. So this is a critical risk when it comes to things like introducing malware to your organization or the laptop that you use. Attackers will try and send emails trying to trick you into clicking on an attachment or a link that prompts you to install a piece of malware. 93% of those organizations don't have any controls to stop a user from just clicking and installing that. 21% have not disabled admin privileges on the standard user accounts. When we talk about admin privileges, really that's just the keys to the kingdom when you talk about having permissions to perform certain actions on the network. And so 21% of those organizations not locking that down is really critical. So if you haven't already, that is really, really important to do. 65% have not implemented any form of employee cyber and awareness training. So we know that more than 90% of cyber incidents result initially from some sort of human error or the human factor. So a lot of what we're seeing is attackers leveraging email to get into the organization, trying to trick staff into clicking on links, like I said, into providing username and password details. And so there really needs to be an emphasis on uplifting your staff's capability to understand these risks, to spot them, and to know what to do when they actually identify that. Just before I go, let's probably launch the second poll, Rob, and hear from everyone on the call. So do you outsource your IT infrastructure management to an external provider? Do you use a managed service provider, or do you have it all in-house? Should be enough time. Okay, so it's a pretty even split. What we're seeing is that most do outsource it. Regardless of who is managing it, there still needs to be that independent review of who's actually managing that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not enough to trust who is implementing those controls for you to blindly say that they're doing the right thing. It is really critical to get an independent assessment to understand whether that's actually being done effectively. So thanks everyone for your responses. The next part of this presentation is really around the threat landscape. So we looked at the key risks for each of the organizations who took part, and we boiled down the key threats to 4 overarching tactics or techniques. So the first is compromised account or credentials. So typically we see this coming from if you've signed up to a particular third-party service, that third-party service has incurred a data breach and has impacted your username and password details being made publicly available. Attackers will purchase that data from, typically it's a dark web forum, and will use that information because they know that most people use the same passwords, passwords across multiple systems, and they will try and access whatever systems you have with that information. The second one is business email compromise. So this is really when an attacker poses as a vendor or a service provider and says, your bill for our service is due on this date. We've since changed our payment details to this new account number. Please transfer the funds by this date. Of course, that is all impersonation, and it's quite a primitive form of attack, but it's really surprising how many organizations actually have fallen for this particular, and some of them can be really convincing. So there has been millions of dollars of loss that have occurred from business email compromise. The third one is ransomware. So, and essentially it's the same threat vector, which is email. So we're seeing that email is the gateway for attackers to NFPs, really relying on that impersonation to try and trick people into installing a software, which essentially locks the files or encrypts the files on your device. And the ransom part of that is that they will request a certain payment to actually unlock the files. Otherwise, they typically threaten you with publishing that in an open forum like the dark web. So key thing here is never reason with criminals, regardless of what they're promising you. Never pay a ransom. That is our recommendation, because there's no certainty that they'll actually provide you with access to your data again. The key thing here is to have frequent backups. So if you've got a robust backup and restore process in place, this will largely mitigate the risk associated with ransomware, because essentially you can just restore from the last backup and gain access to the information. You will only have lost the information from whatever that length of time has been between the backup and that restore. The last one there is supply chain attack. And I touched on this briefly before, but really attackers are focusing on software vendors and targeting, because they know that NFPs are moving to cloud-based software. And so they're targeting those vendors. And we've seen that in the news play out. The biggest instance of an NFP-related supply chain attack is the Pareto firm, which many of you will have heard of, which is essentially involving tens of thousands of Australian donors. And they were insolvent as a result of that. So they are out of business as a result of that cyber attack. A few of the other key high profile ones that I've included here, MediSecure, which I'm sure many will have remembered. Close to 13 million Australians impacted, sensitive personal health information as well. So it goes beyond just financial loss into potential identity theft of those whose data has been breached. And we've got to think from an NFP perspective. The organizations in this program were storing and processing the data of our most vulnerable communities. So things like identity theft will have a magnified impact on them. St. Vincent's Health Network, again, similar profiles of information. And a more timely or topical one is the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice data breach. So this was on a portal or a database that stores information related to AVOs, which could be absolutely catastrophic for people who are victim survivors of domestic and family violence. If some of that information were to fall into the wrong hands, the impact would be devastating potentially. So this little video here presents a case study from that organization that I mentioned who incurred that data breach not long after we engaged them. So really what happened is the attacker has sent a fake email to the employee impersonating someone legitimate. Essentially, the email contains a link to a fake Microsoft login page, which the employee has clicked on and entered their username and password in. The attacker now has access to those credentials and has used those to access the organization's Microsoft environment. So that included access to SharePoint and OneDrive, which have client information and personal information in it. It also provided access to the entire Outlook mailbox contact list, which was used by the attacker to rinse and repeat this whole process. So countless numbers of organizations would have been involved in that and would have received emails. And in fact, WorkVentures received similar emails. Luckily, we were able to spot that and flag that down as quickly as possible. But the impact or the chain reaction from these sort of attacks can be quite far-reaching. And here's a bit of a basics checklist. So I would really look at these things, consider whether these are in place. Also, there may be some that you take back to your IT guy or your IT managed service provider and ask them whether these things are in place. So first and foremost with everything is, have you assessed your cyber risks in the last year? I know we did the poll to understand that. So if you haven't, definitely look to conduct an assessment to see where those risks lie. Do enforce strong passwords and multi-factor authentication for all systems. So the one thing that would have mitigated that entire scenario that I just showed you is multi-factor authentication. So essentially, on top of your username and password to authenticate to a system, having a separate system that provides you with a one-time password, that will decrease your risk exposure exponentially. Do you patch all applications and operating systems? So essentially, whenever a software vendor adds new features and changes that application's code, there are new vulnerabilities that are introduced to it. And so they will release patches to fix those vulnerabilities. And if you're not applying those patches to your applications and operating system, then those will reside in your system and can be used against you by an attacker. Encrypting sensitive data that's exposed to the internet. So realistically, anything that's exposed to the internet is fair game to attackers. And so we need to put additional controls in place. Encryption essentially masks your data and basically jumbles it up into an unreadable mix of characters, which can only be read by someone who has the decryption key. So that's a really important control. Have you restricted IT admin privileges? We mentioned that one previously and why that's important. Have you restricted the installation and execution of unapproved software? So essentially, if you have an approved list of what you can install and execute, anything outside of that that could be sent to you by an attacker should be blocked by the network. Are your staff trained to identify phishing emails? So like I said, almost all attacks originate from an email being sent and human error. So that part is also quite critical. Backing up critical data and actually testing that restore capability works. Do you conduct due diligence on third-party vendors? Like I said, if you haven't already migrated to the cloud, most organizations are doing that. The risk changes, right? We need to be conducting that due diligence on how they're managing your data. And lastly, do you have a process in place to log and monitor endpoint devices and network infrastructure? So we can do all of these other things, but if we don't have the ability to identify and detect when something has gone wrong, that could be catastrophic. So there needs to be an oversight of what's happening within the network. So I'll lodge one more poll, keen to hear from everyone and sort of just appreciate that I've been speaking for a long time. So how is your IT network and systems environment hosted? So on premises, basically, do you have all the servers and network infrastructure on the premises or in the office? Do you outsource that? And is it managed by third parties, or is it sort of a split of both? Should be enough time. Let's have a look. Yeah. So yeah, this is again quite representative of what we've seen, especially from those 14 orgs that were involved in this project. So not many have purely an on-premises setup anymore. Even those who selected hybrid, there is still a reliance on cloud-based services and third-party vendors. So again, that due diligence piece is really critical. I'll also ask if we can launch the last poll, please, Rob, before we go into the Buttery case study. So do you think there is a benefit of an independent cybersecurity assessment in the next 6 months? Should be enough time. Great. Guessing that those who are no or unsure, you know, if you don't see the value, perhaps you have done one already in the last 6 months. So look, we typically recommend that these are performed annually because the threat environment changes. So the techniques, tactics that threat actors are using change quite dynamically. So does technology, right? We've seen AI and large language models like ChatGPT and being used and leveraged by threat actors. So things like that and the introduction of new technologies definitely does change the risk environment. So thanks everyone for taking part in those. So moving now into a case study, I'll hand back to Rob to introduce Ari and hear about their experience. So thanks, everyone. Rob, you're on mute.
You might have a few technical difficulties for poor Rob.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
And yes.
Fantastic. Apologies for that. So I was just saying, encouraging participants to continue to put questions in the Q&A function for when we get to the end of the session. Ari, thank you so much for joining us. For people who don't know, Ari is the Executive Director of Corporate Services at the Buttery. Thank you so much for being here, Ari.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Rob, and thank you to NADA and to WorkVentures for the amazing opportunity to participate in their assessment program.
Right. Okay, so we're going to ask you a few questions. So
Sure.
before embarking on this project, how much emphasis or priority was placed on cybersecurity within the Buttery?
Well, the Buttery has an IT managed service provider, like most NADA members. However, ours is a sole trader, and he's a network generalist and definitely not a cybersecurity specialist. So I think at the Buttery, we were quite convinced that we knew we needed to do more to improve our cybersecurity, but we just didn't know what that actually meant. So we weren't sure of what steps to take and what the scope of works were, as we don't have any technical IT people in-house in our organization.
Right, and I'm sure that would be a very similar experience for many NADA members. So having now gone through the holistic cybersecurity assessment, what would you see as the most valuable takeaways that you'd like to share with the sector?
Look, a few takeaways from the process. The process is quite comprehensive, and you have to understand that it's a big investment, but it is a very, very valuable one. I think the outcome really hit home to us that how vulnerable the NFP sector actually is in cybersecurity. I didn't realize how much we are targeted. And I guess I can understand that we don't all have huge line items in our budget for cybersecurity. So it does make us a lot more vulnerable than corporate entities. One of the things that we really liked about the assessment was that it provided some insights into our organization, because we had no perspective about how we might compare to our peers or what was normal, a normal level of cybersecurity in the sector. So those insights gave us a valuable measure. And what we found out was that although we knew that there was work to do and that there were definitely some vulnerabilities that were exposed, that actually our internal risk procedures were quite strong in comparison to the framework. Definitely, I would have to say the most valuable thing that we got out of the assessment was that WorkVentures actually give you a report at the end of it. And in that report, they don't just give you this technical mumbo jumbo that you can't understand, or this list of stuff that you look at and go, I don't know what this actually means. What it does is it gives you some really practical advice. It's very non-technical. It was plain English. And not only do you get this written report, you get a feedback session with the whole team. So you get an opportunity to review it and then ask your questions so that you can flesh out the things that you might not understand very well, or you would like more information about. And what we were able to do with that report was actually formulate an action plan, and they gave us some real tangible deliverables, which meant that we're working towards something now that had specific actions and that could be measured later, so that we could demonstrate to our board that we had had an actual uplift in our cybersecurity space.
Right, thanks for that, Ari. And the last question, so for other NADA members who might be unsure about where to start with cybersecurity, what advice would you give based on your experience?
It has been an experience, Rob. We started this process in May, and I'm very proud to say that we've just delivered our very first digital transformation strategy to our board. It has been a real journey for us. We're a relatively small organisation. So if I could allow the NADA members on the line today to take home one thing, is that it really only takes one person to drive real change in this space. And that the ripple effect of you taking ownership of this particular issue in your organisation can be quite significant. You don't have to be an IT expert to be that person. I nominated myself as the cyber warden and did some very simple online training to uplift my own understanding. The next thing is don't be afraid to ask for help. I couldn't do it alone, even though one person can take that first step and push the leadership team along. I did need some help. So I recruited a working team, and in the end, there was actually only 3 of us that ended up working on that digital transformation strategy, but we were able to prioritize our strategic digital priorities. We were able to come up with the things that an action plan together. And I didn't have to share that burden alone. So definitely look internally, and you might find that there might be somebody in your organization that you might not even have thought about that could actually be very engaging in this space. And looking externally now, not just inside your organization, but one of the things that the Buttery did was we interviewed a lot of cybersecurity partners, because we knew what our vulnerabilities were, or the things that we wanted to work on. We needed to go to a specialist. And I was really shocked to learn that every single cybersecurity partner we talked to presented a completely different opportunity. No 2 programs that were presented were the same at all. They were very, very different. Every single provider took a different approach. They had different scope. They had different prices. So I guess the message is that it doesn't really matter how big, small, sophisticated or style of organization you work in. There will be an organization out there for you. So you just need to get out there and start learning about which organizations are available. But what you need to do before you actually start pursuing a cybersecurity partner is you need to actually know what you're actually looking for and what you want to achieve in the space. And that's why the WorkVentures assessment was so crucial for us, because it actually gave us a very clear scope of works about the things that we needed to do to get to where we wanted to be.
Great. Thanks so much, Ari. We'll invite Gabe back now as well, and really encourage members to ask some other questions. We do have a question already in the chat, which I think is a good one. And I think Gabe or Mill, are you able to answer that question? Is there any evidence to say that externally managed services are more or less secure than internally managed?
In the context of this project, like I said, there was 13 organizations who used externally managed providers, and there was one who had an in-house team. The in-house team actually, they had the highest maturity score. However, that's sort of it's not enough to extrapolate out and say that that is the case more broadly, because actually someone else said it, that the risk is really the same. Like, it just comes down to who is managing the infrastructure, how they've done that. And because the NFP sector, we've seen that there's such a variety of MSPs, they can all be managing things differently. So yeah, hopefully that addresses the question there.
Thanks, Gabe. And I mean, I think for me, just reflecting on conversations that we have with NADA members, this is another thing that NGOs need to consider on top of, already, busy back-end types of functions that they aren't funded by government to do. So it was really, positive to hear that part of the objectives was to get an understanding of what cybersecurity looks like within the not-for-profit sector to inform the New South Wales government. So are you able to tell us any more on what the report says that would be useful for us? Because I know that part of this is about NADA advocating on behalf of the sector as well in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So there were recommendations to both state and federal governments. So federal government have a cybersecurity strategy out to 2030. They've got quite ambitious goals, and they're focused a lot around the critical infrastructure sector and the financial services sector. So what we really have been doing is speaking with some of the key departments that are formulating that strategy and saying that the NFP sector absolutely needs more funding. Specifically, they need funding for cyber assessment, because that's really the starting place to understand what next needs to be done. And it needs to be more than just a self-survey assessment like what currently exists. It needs to be really comprehensive. You need to ask the right questions and really get quite granular to see what needs to be done. So that's one of the key recommendations to government. The second is that we need a cybersecurity standard that is not, because what we see is like a lot of these cybersecurity standards are poised towards large enterprise environments. Like people might have heard of ISO 27001, which is like the industry's best practice, but it is really too much to ask a lot of the NFPs, especially if you look at like the scope of the organizations that we work with. It's too much to ask that of them. So the standard that we propose needs to be something that is achievable and is not going to cost them an arm and a leg, and doesn't have huge yearly maintenance fees for audits. So those are the two key ones. We've also got a lot of recommendations for NFPs themselves. So I know that I shared the checklist on this call, but it'd be great for when the report is published and distributed, just to have a look and see some of the recommendations we put forward, and see if you can look to implement those as well.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. I think that's really important. And obviously NADA has a big role, but of course, NGOs need to, engage with their boards on the best approach to manage cybersecurity risk. I mean, I found it very, a lot of what you talked about resonated with us, because NADA ourselves is a small not-for-profit. I think for us, one of the biggest risks is database and how we hold client data. Thankfully, a lot of the data that comes into database is de-identified, so it reduces some of our risk. But I know that for a lot of our members, they would see that as some of the biggest risks in terms of protecting the information of the people that are coming into their services.
Absolutely.
And I was just thinking about, that you talked about managed IT, but often we find with a lot of our members, they may have a managed IT provider, but then it's a separate provider who might be supporting their client management system as well.
Yep.
And, the different types of approaches that NGOs might need to consider as part of that.
Yeah, that decentralization of how things are managed can also lead to not knowing where to start. And so the assessment will really wrap up that. We'll reach out to all of those different, like whoever manages the CMS will reach out to understand, or whoever manages the website, the network itself, really pulling that all together.
That's right, because I think I can imagine what would happen then is a very disjointed approach to cybersecurity risks, where they're asking their CMS provider to provide some type of level of, how they protect cybersecurity, then their managed IT provider, and then internally they might do some type of internal checks themselves as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's another question, Rob, and this is for Gabe as well. I think it's more statement. I would assume that risks are the same. I'm kind of interpreting that as a question to asking whether the risk that we are seeing amongst all the NFPs are similar or the same.
Okay. The answer is no. So we're seeing a really wide variety of different vulnerabilities and risk findings. So it's not a cookie cutter lift and shift sort of thing. You really need to understand specifically things like the processes you have internally, your staff, the systems you rely on will all change organization to organization. And like I said, the MSPs that NFPs are relying on, we haven't really seen too many constants there. Sometimes it's like a family relationship. Like my uncle knows how to manage he's a network engineer, so he'll do this on our behalf. We've seen that quite regularly, right? And so that's really where things differ, because no two approaches are the same.
Are there any other questions for Gabe or Ari or for Rob?
I think for me, what we're committing to is obviously we'll have a recording of this webinar that we'll put up, because we know that a lot of our members register for these things to watch at a later time as well. So I know we'll probably have some questions after this as well. So an invitation to those who are watching this as a recording to feel free to reach out to either WorkVentures or myself, or I'm sure the Buttery would also be happy to talk about their experiences offline as well. I think for us, the other part is waiting for the report. We're excited to see what that report looks like, to have a really good understanding of on the ground what that really looks like for the not-for-profit sector here in New South Wales, so that we can use that to advocate on behalf of members. But also I think it's going to be useful for you all as services to have a look at that as well, to reflect on what that means for your own services and have those discussions with your board.
Absolutely, Rob. And yeah, any recommendations for staff training, Gabe? Is
Staff
something simple, they say, yes.
Yeah, look, simple. I think the fact is that nobody really wants to do this, and so the key is to find how to keep people engaged. A really good way that we found of doing that is to simulate what's actually happening in the real world, and have phishing simulations sent to your staff members, and then you can actually pinpoint areas of risk. Look at, perhaps what areas or what types of techniques people are getting hung up on, and focus a bit more of the awareness around that.
Right. Well, Rob, we have an offer for your members.
Great.
Yeah, so as another member, the first 3 organizations to sign up with WorkVentures for a cybersecurity assessment will get a special discounted price. But again, if you just need to have a consultation with us without any obligation, please feel free to reach out to us. As I said, no obligations, or it's a free consultation.
Right. Okay. Well, that sounds like a good offer, Mel. Thank you. Okay, well, if we've got no further questions, we might wrap up. Sorry, we just got another question come through. Oh, what's the discount? I like the honesty.
Yeah, it's a 33%. Look, I mean, usually I'll tell you basically, our assessment is $7,500, but basically the discounted price is $5,000. So that's a 33%.
Okay, thanks, Mel. And is that a set price regardless of the size of the organization, or
Yes.
is there variability? Okay.
Correct.
Great.
And
okay.
it's usually a three-week process, the entire workshop and the assessment, the analyzing and reporting back.
Great. Excellent. Well, I'm sure you'll get some inquiries of interested people. And as I say, for people watching online, you have got the contact details there. Sorry, we've got another question coming through. Does that cover Essential 8 and cybersecurity?
Yeah, so a lot of our methodology is mapped to the Essential 8, so we can absolutely, and it's really fit for purpose, right? If you want to focus on the Essential 8, we map our controls to that specific framework. If there's another framework like NIST or ISO, we can absolutely do the same.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Gabe and Mil and Ari, for coming to share your experiences with us today. No doubt you'll be hearing from NADA and others to provide support around cybersecurity in the future as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.